Timothy, I want you to understand, if you're going to be strong, you have to trust God for your strength. I say this to us parenthetically, beloved, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care who you're connected to, how strong you think you are no stronger than the God who is inside of you. And if you're going to handle the task of ministry and serving God, your strength must be completely in God. And that's what Paul is saying to them. He says, now Timothy, he says, not only must you rely on God for strength, but you have to relay his message to faithful servants. What Paul does with Timothy and to us in this particular passage, he uses four particular metaphors. He uses the steward, the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer. He simply says in verse 2, from the perspective of the steward, he says, Timothy, entrust what I've told you in the company of witnesses to faithful men who will share this with others. He in essence says, Timothy, I need you to find some people that you can help mimic to become more like you based upon your relationship with Christ, so that they can get more people that will mimic them to become more like Jesus because of how they act like Jesus. He says, Timothy, I need you to find some people that you can put your hand on, that you can share the testimony that I've given you, and you can entrust them with this message so that they can share other people. Do you not understand, beloved? Every week I'm here to make a deposit into your life every week so that you can make a deposit into somebody else's life, so that the deposit that you make into somebody else's life, they ought to make it into somebody else's life. To suggest we come to church to do more than just be recipients of information, but we ought to come that we can gain information so that we can share that information so that somebody can experience transformation. It means that you have to do more than just be satisfied with sitting on the seat every Sunday, just showing up. You have to say that I've shown up so that I can get something that I can tell somebody else about. And the question is, why did you even show up? Because you ought to have shown up so that you can get something that you can take to share with somebody else. It ought to be more than what somebody else had on. It ought to be more than what somebody looked like. It ought to be the word that you have received and obtained from God through your pastor, that you can take that word and share with somebody and empower and encourage their life, because you don't know the impact and the gravity of your words to somebody every day that God puts in proximity of you. Every person that comes in the company of your presence every single day, God does not allow them to come into the company of your presence by accident. Even the folk who irritate your life, they are there for a purpose in your life. And God sends every person in your office, every person in your in proximity of you, every person that gets near you, every person that you literally come into contact with every day. God has sent them into your life for some particular purpose, and you ought to make an impact on their life that after they've been around you, they'll never leave the same. So Paul tells Timothy, he says, you got to entrust this to faithful men. The treasure is too valuable for you to just give it to anybody. The treasure is that's why you ought not waste your words with anybody. Your words ought to be so valuable that you don't waste your words just talking to anybody and having frivolous conversation. Your words ought to be so substantive that when you share them, you want them to impact somebody's life so much so that they think differently after being around you, that they have a different outlook after being around you. You ought to want somebody to be completely different after being around you. So Paul says, Timothy says, you gotta rely on God for strength. You got to relate this message. He says, but then you got to realize that you must suffer. Because he says in verse 3, he says, and for suffer hardship with me as a good soldier. He says, and then don't get entangled in the affairs of the world. He says, Timothy, you got to remember this, that you have to suffer. And you have to remember who enlisted you. And you have to remember that you cannot get caught up in everything that's happening in the world. Well, he says this, first of all, he says, number one, you have to suffer. Now, when he says suffer hardship as a good soldier, it's a present tense, passive voice, imperative mood verb. Imperative mood means a command. Passive voice means the subject receives the action. Present tense means it's continuous, a linear action. So what Paul tells Timothy is this: you've got to do what is necessary to take some pain, because it's part of the process. He simply says, Timothy, you got to stop being a scary cat. You got to stop being timid. You got to stop being nervous about standing for the Lord. Now, come here a little closer. You've got to understand your testimony in Christ ought to be so strong that you ought not be nervous to share it. Now, it's one thing for you to share it by talking. It's another thing for you to share it by walking. See, a lot of folk are not intrigued by your talking testimony. They are intrigued by your walking testimony.